This is easily one of the most debatable words in modern Christianity. Most people will turn to you and point to Christian sources and say, look, the word is translated as fornication. What they neglect is what fornication meant when this word was translated, as well as what this word meant when it was said. The word in question is porn, or as some of you know from your Bible studies as porneia, Pornuo, or Pornos. Any variation of the word with any variety of suffixes, prefixes, and even interfixes. Now, in order for us to define a word from the past, we have to first identify the time frame that we're trying to understand. And for us, as Christians, that would be the 1st century, the earliest source for our New Testament. Now, we have to gather all the sources from that time frame and before that time frame, at least a little while before, but never after. Now, I say this, even though it might sound silly, but people do try and pull sources from later on. And it's silly because if you think about it, how can you know the definition of the word in the future? You can't. Like it's just silly. So don't do that. Pull from the time frame and pull from before. All we know is now and the past. So once we have our sources, that's when we can get our good idea of the word. I've already put in a whole bunch of work in for that. If you guys want to see all the sources that I have so far, even some of my research lists, in the description there'll be a link to a Google Doc that will have everything nice and neat and organized, the locations within these works, even links to free public access versions of these works, so you have no excuse to go read it yourself. You don't have to buy anything. You don't have to spend any money. It's free. Anyways, after looking at all these sources and studying them myself, the definition I came to was that porn is profanity. It literally means prostitution and anything prostitution related. But it is very similar to the modern word whore, in that when you call someone a whore, you're not literally calling them a whore, you're degrading them. You're calling into question things like their character or their morality. But in the case of porn, when you use it against someone, you're calling into question their faithfulness. Are they loyal? Things like that. Now, in order to prove the literal, we're going to start there since, that's probably where we should start. First thing we can look at is a source from the 3rd century BC, Xenophon. I think that's how you say his name. I have no idea. Don't butcher me for butchering his name. But he actually just quotes Socrates from the 5th century BC. And Socrates literally defined porn as a woman who does business with her body. Later on in the 1st century, actually at the same time and during the life of Jesus, we have another author, Philo of Alexandria, who was, just like Jesus, a Jew. I have no idea if he knows anything about Jesus or about Christianity. I didn't do that big of a research into who Philo was, just the source that I found with porneia in it. Or not porneia, but porn in it. Now, he actually directly defines it as, yet again, a woman who traffics her body. So even as a Jew, that is how they used that word. Us as Christians, we actually have an even better source. Well, actually, even the Jews do too. The Septuagint, the Greek translations of the Jewish texts used during the life of Jesus. In this, if we look at the book of Ezekiel, chapter 16, verses 33 through 34, I believe, it'll be somewhere around there. Porn gets directly defined in the Bible as selling sex for money. Now, this passage is actually especially important for both Jews and Christians because it doesn't just use Greek. This is also in the Hebrew, where ZNH, zana, gets translated or defined the same way. Even in Latin, the Latin Vulgate, fornicatio, fornication, gets defined in the exact same way. But regardless, even though for some reason people still debate it, or Christians debate it, even though it's right there in front of you, let's go ahead and look at one of the first usages I have during the 1st century where it crosses the boundary from literal to profane. This is in a couple works by Dio Chrysostom. I believe it's on Slavery and Freedom 1 and on Fortune 2, I believe. But either way, he uses the word pimp and prostitute literally, but he then goes on to kind of paint them in a way of degradation, where they are of a lower status within society. Now, if we want to continue looking into, well, if we don't want to, we kind of need to keep looking into the profane usages. But in order to keep doing that, we can then start back in time again during the 4th century BC. We can look at Aeschines, yet again, like Xenophon. I don't know how to say his name. Don't butcher me for butchering it. In his work against Timarchus, he actually uses this word a whole bunch of times to slander his political opponent. He's basically saying that his opponent is willing to take bribes in exchange for political favors, to cast his vote in certain ways or testify in certain ways for a little bit of money, for something in return. Flash forward all the way back to the 1st century, we can return back to our friend Philo of Alexandria, the Jew from the 1st century. In another one of his works, I can't remember the name, he actually goes back and he quotes from Deuteronomy, specifically the law where a prostitute is not allowed to bring her income to the temple as an offering. However, he goes on to declare his opinion about this, and it is that if you have ever prostituted or been unfaithful in any morality, any one of your good works is now void. It's worthless. So he equates the porn word with degrading your character, to making your goodness bad, essentially. Now, if we want to look to the Bible for this, we can look at sources such as Isaiah, the 1st chapter, verse 21, as well as Jeremiah 2, chapter 2, verse 20. Now, in both of these, it is basically saying that Israel, or God's people, is prostituting themselves to other gods or other moralities. Now, we do have to keep in mind that I believe in these books, it's also equating God's people to a marriage with him. So if we apply this context to that, these nations are being unfaithful to God. It's slandering their faithfulness to him. That's pretty much how I got here. If you want to check out all the sources, their link will be in the description. I might even do a pinned comment. I don't know, either one. It'll be in either place. You can go read all the sources yourself. They're all free. Nothing you have to worry about on your part on that. But that's how I got there. It's a literal prostitution related, but it's also profane to call into question somebody's faithfulness. So yeah, thank you. All right, is this close enough? Am I close enough? Is any of this close enough? All right, first try, let's go.